welcome back to YourTown TV and the Arts of the Answer and our very, very special episode featuring the poet Garland Thomas Jr. as we look ahead to April as Poetry Month. We talked about poetry out loud that he'll bring to Monterey County. We talked about the poetry slams that he brings to Monterey, giving people opportunity after opportunity to become poets, to develop their poetry, to develop their own voice in so many magical ways. And right now, we're going to put him on the spot and have him talk about his own poetry and his own process. And thanks again, Garland, for being our very special guest today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So, Garland, I did come across something that said that you felt like in 1990 you were discovering poetry within your own self. Mm-hmm. And I know you've been acting. Have you been acting all your whole life?
Technically, yes. My first role was actually when I was 5 years old.
Oh.
But I didn't actually start picking it up till I was in my 20s in Austin, Texas.
So tell us about being in Austin and what happened. What was that moment like when you realized, wait, actually, I'm a poet?
Well, it's interesting because I actually had found poetry in Los Angeles. In 1990, I was living in Los Angeles, and I'd been there since 1985, and I had been working in the film industry, theater and the film industry. I worked for Los Angeles Theater Center. I was a sound technician. I also went to carpentry. I ended up building sets for commercials and movies and what have you. I was a technician, and so I basically did everything. I did transportation, which meant you moved cars around and took people around. I was production assistant. I did everything. But what I found is in 1990, I found that I was working, right? Now, when I would work, and when you'd work on a film project or a television show, oftentimes you'd have literally 16, 17, 18-hour days. Yeah. And at that point,
it's grueling, huh?
It was very grueling. At one point, I was literally working 6 days a week, sometimes as many as 18 hours a day. And then when the job was over, I would go home and collapse for 2 weeks. And then begin the search for the next job or begin the next job. But what I realized is that in those in-between times, when I wasn't working, I had no life. Even when I was working, I had no life. My whole life was just on the set, right? So I had no life. So it was just working, work, sleep, eat, shower, get up, work, right? So I just began to feel like I need something else. I'm not, I don't know, this is just not so satisfying.
There's more to you.
I'm happy to be working. So on an off night, it just so happened to be a Tuesday night. There happened to be at that time at a little place that was then called Highland Grounds on Highland Avenue in Melrose. It was a coffee house. They had an open poetry reading night on Tuesday nights. I just happened to wander by. I had no clue that was going on. I was like, this is a cool looking place. I'd love a cup of coffee. Let me go in. So I went in and I sat down and got a cup of coffee, and there it was happening. So I started to watch, and I was like, oh, this is very interesting. The host, James Boomer Maverick, he was from New York. He is from New York, and so he was making comments. He was being witty, charming MC, and so making jokes and talking about New York. And so I said something to him from the audience about New York in response to something that he said. So we started this weird little thing, right? Weird little exchange.
Right there,
So, and I actually had gotten inspired listening to the poets, and I had started to write a poem. And just out of the blue, I just started to write a poem. So I'm sitting there writing, so I chime in, and he sees me writing, and I guess he was slow that night. The list was pretty small, and so he didn't have as many poets as he'd like. So he saw me writing, and he came over to me, and he cajoled me into getting up and reading.
Right then on the spot?
Right then on the spot, what I had just wrote.
Only an actor can do that.
I was like, I mean, I didn't want to do it, but he got me up there, and so I did it, and I got a great reaction.
Isn't that great?
I got a fabulous reaction. I literally was there every Tuesday night for the next two and a half years. Every Tuesday night. When I wasn't working, as long as I wasn't working, Tuesday night, that's where you found me. And so that's where I began to hone my skills. And so I began really writing, and it just started pouring out of me. And so literally I was coming in with a new piece every week. And it also was at the time, too, when Oil, of course, was a huge issue in 1990.
Yes.
This was prior to the first Gulf War, but there was all sorts of stuff going on, and all sorts of political stuff, and it seemed like everything was corrupt. So I began to use the art along with my other fellow poets that I would meet and actors. We were all about trying to be activists as well, trying to get a good message out. And so I started writing poems. Like one poem started off, the first line was, "People pick their noses sitting in their cars." While people fight for oil across it, So I started off like that. So we started doing things. I did a piece. I ended up connecting with a dear friend of mine, Mauro Montero, and we began to perform together and craft works together. And I wrote a piece called "The Constitution is Burning Down." And literally, Mauro created the scroll, so I would read from the scroll.
Look at that again. Huh?
It's sad to say, but yeah, it was like, and so
maybe
it was
we should read it every week.
I've reread it recently. I went, wow, this is eerie that it still kind of feels like relevant and what have you. But it was all about the Constitution is burning down, our great house. We got to get it. We got to sound the alarm. We've got to get out there and fight this and what have you. So it just sort of began like that. But just the love that I got and the personal joy and the personal satisfaction I got from something that I wrote going into someone else's ears and their eyes lighting up and going, oh, I get it. Or I used to always say that if I could make someone connect with one person, then I've done my job. And if I can get somebody to think about something in a way that they hadn't thought about it before, then I've also done my job.
That's beautiful. How has your work really changed over this time, and or has it much? And what are the main influences you look to now to keep you excited and moving and whatnot?
It's changed a little bit in that I'm not quite so hard on the politics directly calling things out and what have you, and calling people out and what have you. It's, for me, a lot of it is about moments that I capture, that I see, a moment that I experience, that I feel like, wow, I want to capture this and I'd like to share this with somebody. A lot of it's observational. Most of it is actually observational on me personally in an interesting, in a way though that's not, I don't like to necessarily be the spotlight of these things, but if you were to read these poems and read a bunch of them, you would start to get a sense of who I was and what I was about. So I guess it's sort of changed, and I'd like to say it's matured. I'd like to think that I've become a better writer.
And when you think about like the mechanics, and when you think about some of the craft of poetry, and you're saying, I hope I've gotten better. Can you help people understand what that might mean to a poet? Lots of times when people think of the arts, they think about, oh, it's great for people who like that sort of thing. Oh, it's nice to give people an opportunity to express themselves. But what I see the magic really is, it's in that mastery. We talked about that with the Poetry Out Loud. We talked about it even in the context of a slam, where people still have a sense that when people get up for a slam, they just like say whatever. And that's so not true. They've thought a lot about it. They've perfected how they want things to sound, how the tempo, the pacing of everything is really choreographed. And so I think it'd be nice if you could share your own experience of handling the craft of the work.
The craft is really important, and the craft is something that you only learn just by doing it. Someone asked August Wilson once, the great playwright, how do I write? How do you write? How do you do this? How do you do this? And he said, you write, and 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 you write some more, and then you keep writing, and you just keep writing. And so, mastering the craft is very important because you have all these elements. And, well, number one, the first thing, and this is a big driver for me, I don't want to look stupid in front of people.
Nobody does.
Nobody wants to look dumb in front of people. In fact, that's one of the greatest fears of speaking in front of people, is that you're going to look like an idiot. And that people are going to think, oh my God, what a moron, why am I here?
People don't even want to go to museums because they're afraid.
Exactly. It's really interesting because I think it's different for everybody. For me, it's about what makes me happy first.
Okay.
If
so you can feel it.
I can feel it. For me, it's all about a feeling.
Okay.
If I can get a feeling from a line that I've written,
Yep.
then I know I'm on the right track. Now, craft also comes into little things like looking at, oh my God, I just said the word 5 different times in 3 lines. You know, and you got to go like, okay, that's not going to fly, right? So you got to look at that, and it forces you to look at your word construction. What words are you using?
Yeah.
You know, many poets, and I'm no different either, will go use a dictionary or a thesaurus.
Okay.
Keep those handy.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, because you're always trying to find an interesting way, some way that is not pedestrian, some little twist that is like, that catches people. And for me, it's also very important that you try and pay attention to these things because, and I tell this to the people all the time, is that, you know, if I'm going to be bold enough to say, you need to stop whatever it is that you're doing, out of the 3 trillion things that you could or should be doing, right? And give me the next X number of minutes or whatever, right? Number of minutes, by the way, which you will never ever get back.
Right.
Right? We have a finite supply. We're never ever getting them back. Then I better damn well have something worth your time. I better do everything in my power to make it worth your while. And that means looking at the words I've written, looking at the sentences, how are they constructed, looking at the rhythm and the flow. How does this flow? For me also, it's about reading it also. I read my work aloud to myself.
Oh, you do? Okay, yeah.
I do.
Yeah.
I do, because then it starts to give me a sense of how it could sound, where it could go, what kind of meaning. Then the actor part of me starts to come in and starts to go.
I was just going to ask you, what's the influence of being an actor, having the actor's training, perspective, and experience? How does that impact you as a poet?
Well, it's very interesting because it gives me a unique sense. I don't know if it's unique, but it definitely gives me a sense of what will come out of the mouth and how it will come out of the mouth.
You can hear things as you,
I can hear
even
things.
as you're writing.
Yes, you can hear things because you know. I mean, actors oftentimes, a lot of times, actors are given bad writing that they have to make come alive. That's just the job. That's what you have to do, and so you have to work hard to do that. You have to find something in there. So when I'm writing it and I'm reading it back to myself, I'm listening to how it sounds, trying to put myself in the audience point of view. How is this going to sound to them?
You have an awareness always of the audience.
Absolutely.
Not everybody may.
Absolutely.
So, Garland, thank you so much for being with us. We are going to put it on pause right now to get ready to have you present one of your wonderful poems. And again, I'm just really, really excited that you're here. I know you spend a lot of time in New York. Can you tell us just really quick what's up in New York these days?
I inherited my father's theater company,
Yes,
a legendary company called the Frank Silvera Writers Workshop. And we got invited, after the company being based in Harlem for over 30 years, we got invited to move it to Brooklyn to a place called Restoration Plaza and be in residence at the Billie Holiday Theater. So we develop new plays. We do new play readings with moderated talkbacks monthly, and then we have other programs that we do as well.
All right, I'm going to make a commitment right now. One day I'm going to see you there.
Excellent.
Because that is just too good. So thank you so much for still hanging in there in Monterey County as much as you can.
I love Monterey.
I look forward to hearing your poem, and we'll just take a pause right now. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to be reading a poem from my new book of poems, which is coming out later this year on Old Hat Press. The book is called Garland at 18, New Book of Poems. It's basically going to be a collection of poems that I've written over the last 20 years or so. So it's kind of an anthology of my work, and I'm really excited about it. Old Hat Press is a brand new imprint that was started by a dear friend of mine, Christian Elder, whose father, Lonnie Elder III, was a very well-known playwright, award-winning playwright, as well as a television and film screenwriter. So I'm going to be the first poet that Old Hat Press publishes on their new imprint. So I'm very, very excited about that. So I'm going to read you a poem from the book. It's called Somebody Write Me a Poem. Somebody write me a poem, long and sweet, with a rhythm as fine as her hips. Rolling down hills on Route 66, they rise and fall, one breath after another. The country breathing in and out while rubber smacks tar veins, shooting us forward. We roll up and down the land like hands on a body or a drummer's beat on skin. And I lay in my bed at night thinking, somebody write me a poem that feels like sunset. Sitting on the porch, cool glass of lemonade in my hand, dinner in the kitchen, the smell creeping out the door to tell me soon I would eat, drink, and be merry. A black Labrador dog coming up the driveway, his tail wagging, and the cocktail in my hand is not yet a problem. These are better times. And again, I think, somebody write me a poem that tells me about my own history, painting pictures of activists, gangsters, and artists, people willing to put their freedom on the line because freedom was on the line. The color line, the Mason-Dixon line, the Friday night basement sessions with the old mimeograph machine, the Xerox copier before there ever was a Xerox copier. It was the printing press of the people bought by schools, churches, and businesses everywhere and brought to bear in the 50s fight for civil rights. My 10 and 12-year-old cousins turning the crank, young cousin Karen collating sheets made of truth. And everyone always said, the truth shall set you free. Well, at least it got us the right to vote. Somebody write me a poem about God and love, sex and joy, how to be spiritual when all I feel is physical. Tell me 1,000 stories when the night has quieted down and I can hear every whisper. I'll take a deep breath, feeling the metaphor fully. And when somebody writes me this poem, I'll read it every day. 1,000 times before bed. I'll learn it by heart, teach it to my children, speak it till my lips turn to dust. And on my epitaph, someone will write this poem where I'll read it even then. Somebody write me a poem. Somebody write me a poem. Somebody write me a poem.